Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burek of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a returning guest. He recently published a new book. It's called A Radically Beneficial World: Automation, Technology, and Creating Jobs for All. The Future Belongs to Work That Is Meaningful. Charles Hugh Smith, thank you for joining me again.
My pleasure, Jason. Always glad to join your show.
Now, Charles, let me just finish reading your bio for our listeners who are unfamiliar with you and who didn't listen to our last interview because I think it was a year or so ago. Charles is the author of Two Minds blog, which is the number 7 on CNBC's top alternative financial sites. He has 9 books published on our economy and society, including Why Things Are Falling Apart and What We Can Do About It, The Nearly Free University in the Emerging Economy, Get a Job, Build a Career, and Defy a Bewildering Economy. And most recently, I just named his book, and his articles are on Financial Sense, Zero Hedge, and David Stockman's Contra Corner. Now, Charles, I want to talk about the job market and how it's changing. There's so many different variables going on. You know, we see the articles on the mainstream media talking about, good for the restaurant workers in Seattle and LA, marching on the streets demanding a living wage, $15 an hour. Then we see there's books coming out about robots and automation. How radically is the jobs market changing right now?
Well, Jason, I think we can see so much evidence that I think we can state categorically it's changing at a fundamental level, qualitatively, not just quantitatively, meaning that it doesn't really matter so much whether we created 100,000 jobs this month or 130,000. What's really changing is beneath the surface of those kinds of unemployment metrics. It's the changing quality of the job and the relationship of capital, technology, and labor. And basically, as we were talking about before we started recording, capital is now really cheap. It's no longer scarce, and labor is not scarce either. And in fact, highly educated labor is no longer scarce. And so, and then you add those two factors to the advances in technology that are surprising a lot of people. For example, self-driving cars. A lot of people, like just a few years ago, thought that's 20 years in the future. And then they were off by like 18 years. And so the velocity of technology and the capabilities of AI, software, and robotics are advancing far faster than the mainstream understands. And so that's all three of those things is pressuring labor and the job market.
Yeah, to add to your point there about how lack of scarcity of labor right now. Now, maybe you have like a degree in Stanford from robotics or something like that. That would be an exception to the rule. But, there's so much high quality labor all around the world now, and especially with the internet and websites like, 99 Designs and Fiverr and Odesk and Elance and those types of websites. It's gotten really easier to compare prices. To give them an example, when Wall Street for Main Street, when we were trying to figure out a logo for our startup company, we went around to graphic designers here in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and the only one who would even speak to us, like she looked at us like we were real cheapskates because she wanted like $2,500 or $3,000 for the logo. I guess she was used to, most of her clients were government agencies, and she was used to charging $5,000 or more for a cheap little logo that she designed, this lady was. And, I went to 99 Designs and shopped around the design we wanted, and I got a really quality graphic designer to design our logo for only a couple $100. So, look at the price difference there for a couple $100 versus many thousands of dollars, and an American worker saying, you're only paying me a couple thousand, that's not nearly enough. So it's just amazing all the different competition and stuff like that that's out there. And that's a great point, too, about how cheap capital is in terms of scarcity now. It's not scarce anymore. If we go back to Keynes's general theory, and I was talking about this before we started recording, in the epilogue of the book, Keynes talked about euthanizing the rentier, which is the people, he said they're useless people once they stop working in the real economy. But, retired people have savings. They can't work full-time jobs due to health or age or things like that, or they don't want to. They want to play with their grandkids and travel. And, they should be able to earn some type of return on their retirement. But Keynes talked about, euthanizing that, ending that, and his goal was to make capital unscarce. was to make capital so easily available, the proletariat could afford it, and not just the bourgeois and the elites and things like that. So it's we have such a rapidly, my opinion, Charles, of the jobs market is, every couple years the thing is just radically changing now. In terms of like the skills that people expect. I mean, in pretty much every single full-time job that's available now for people coming out of college, it's like assumed that these kids, know a lot about the internet, that they can type 70 to 80 words per minute, that they're really good with Microsoft Excel. And if you don't have those skills as base, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, Jason. And I think that it was excellent to bring in Keynes, because, of course, his work is the foundation of all central state and central bank policy. And so they've basically succeeded in making capital un-scarce. It's in oversupply, so its value is basically near zero. But because of the automation that's already been in place and the rise of global competition, then labor is also not scarce. And so for the reasons you explained. And so of the various factors in play, I want to mention a couple of them. One is economist Michael Spence, and he won the Nobel Prize for his work on differentiating labor that can be tradable. In other words, that the labor can be done anywhere in the world to fabricate something or produce a service, and then untradeable work. And so like untradeable work would be like somebody that's going to mow your lawn and take care of your yard. Obviously, you can't really get that done in India. But so some part of the economy, the extremely localized part of the economy, is untradeable. And that's sort of a bastion, if you will, of labor demand, right? We need people to come in and take care of our elderly at home. We need someone to take care of our yard, those kinds of things, pave our roads, that sort of thing. But that's a relatively small part of the economy. And if you have 50 million people looking for jobs, then you've got a huge oversupply of labor for that relatively modest part of the economy. So this is why the value of labor is declining. In other words, the wages are not going up, except if you're in like a government sector union or something that's basically a cartel. The other thing I want to mention is a socio-economist by the name of Emanuel Wallerstein, his claim to fame in the economic space is he developed this concept that each of our socio-economic systems is a world system. In other words, it's like a frame of reference. It's a mindset. It's a whole unique system in and of itself. And so his point in terms of labor is that he said the cost of labor overhead is rising irrespective of the location of the labor and irrespective of any other conditions. And he listed 5 points of why this was so, but we can see this. In other words, wages in China have gone up by 40 to 50% in the last few years. And the cost of hiring somebody in the U.S., it's not the wages that are rising, but it's the labor overhead. That's like the workers' comp, the disability insurance, the health care insurance. It's like on and on and on. So the employers are seeing the cost of hiring people go up, even though they're not paying any more money in the wage. And that's a critical factor that I think is often overlooked because, as I've explained in my work on self-employment and small business, the number of Americans who are actually hiring other people, who are employers is diminishing, and so most Americans have no concept of what it's like to be an employer. They don't know how the expenses, and so that leaves them deficient in experience to understand what Wallerstein was saying is if the labor cost keeps going up, it just makes more and more sense to automate.
Yeah, what people don't understand with the cost rising is that in a bureaucracy, Charles, there's so many government agencies, and these guys want higher salaries that they basically they just have to raise the taxes. So the small business owner, with the payroll tax, they get fleeced. They have to be a tax collector then if you're a small business owner for the government, and basically you have to pay for more and more bureaucracy as a business owner. So all these extra taxes and things like that, politicians don't have to pay for these prices, and this is why the politician like Bernie Sanders, they promise more and more free goodies like free education and all these things. I'm not even sure they're aware we can't afford it. I mean, he'll talk about, oh, we're the richest country in the world, blah, blah, blah. But, like when there's all these expenses already and he keeps making more promises, the only way to afford it is you either tax more people or you inflate the money. So either, and people, I guess inflation is going to be the easiest one because it's more stealth. It's the stealth tax. But in a free market, Charles, wages really don't rise. Wages, due to competition and innovation and new products and services, wages normally fall gradually. But the thing is, normally prices fall. So if wages and prices, because they're symbiotic, if wages aren't rising in a free market, prices have to be allowed to fall, and this is what the central planners, the Keynesians, the people in power, they won't allow, because I think it was Irving Fisher and also Keynes originally when they said during the 1929 crash, we have to keep the price levels higher and things like that, and this led to Smoot-Hawley and other ridiculous tariffs and things like that, where farmers were paid a higher price to let the produce die and things, but if wages aren't rising, prices have to be allowed to fall. This gives the consumer more purchasing power. This is beneficial deflation. This puts more savings in the consumer's pocket. So this is why the economy is as screwed up as it is right now, because prices aren't being allowed to fall in so many different industries. So many different bills are rising, whether that's healthcare, rent, food, things like that. Cable bill just seems to be going up nonstop. A lot of utilities. So. This is just an unfortunate intervention in markets by, central planners.
Very good point, Jason. And I tend to call our world system it's like a state cartel economy. In other words, the government, the central state, controls the economy, and it supports and enforces a bunch of cartels, which are then free to raise prices and maintain their profits. I want to make 2 points. I totally agreeing with you about the purchasing power. And when I talk about the emerging economy, this is like part of the qualitative change in the job market that we started discussing. What I call the emerging economy is not like the emerging economies in the global economy. I'm talking about the economy, the new economy, the digital economy that's emerging in the U.S. and other advanced nations. And this is my kind of catch-all phrase for the things that we were talking about that basically are boring wormholes into cartels. And one example, that we all know of is the music industry, and that used to be a $14 billion cartel. In other words, you wanted to get your music out to the public, you had to deal with a handful of record labels and who controlled the distribution and were like a classic cartel. Now, that entire music industry is now a $7 billion industry. It's fallen in half, and its payrolls have been slashed, its profits have been slashed because the digital economy bored some wormholes in there, and now anybody can share their music, and there's lots of different platforms. And so it was great for the consumer, as you pointed out. Our purchasing power in terms of music and digital media has exploded a lot higher. Another example that I use is like, well, I can buy tax software now for $50 or $60 that totally replaces sort of not CPA, not like really high-end corporate accounting, but just like, basic small business or individual taxpayer kind of services that were typically hundreds of dollars. And so there's a lot of digital leverage in the economy now for those people who are prepared to learn how to use it. And this brings up what you were saying about the base knowledge that you have to have in this emerging economy. And it's what I wrote my book about, because we can wring our hands about the loss of high-paying jobs that were really low skill. In other words, like people seem to pine for this era when a guy could go into a auto factory and learn literally in 5 minutes. Here's the parts you're going to put on, and so he could learn the job in 5 or 10 minutes and then do that 8 hours a day for the rest of his life. Well, it's obvious that that's an unsatisfying job in a lot of ways, right? And so to bemoan the loss of work that can so easily be replaced by machines and computers is kind of foolish in my mind. So we have to look ahead and what kind of skills are scarce. And that's kind of what I've been writing about. And another famous writer was named Peter Drucker, and he was considered a management guru. But one of his most important books was called The Post-Capitalist Society. And he proposed, this was written in like the late 80s, I think, so he was well ahead of his time. He proposed that what was going to be scarce and valuable in the future was workers who owned the skills needed to make and be productive in a digital, high-tech economy. And so he saw the workers who developed the right skills as owning the essential capital in what I call the emerging economy. And a lot of people argue with me and say, no, it's the corporations, they control everything, and you have to work for them. But as you and I are living proof of, and we each know many, many people who have managed to dig wormholes through, that state cartel kind of structure and find a way to make a living on our own, using the digital tools which are now abundant and often free.
Yeah, small businesses are the ones who create jobs. I think it's over 70% of all the full-time jobs are created by small business, but yet, the corporations are the ones who can afford the most lobbying money. So they're buying, with cartels and fascism and crony capitalism and, different names for something like that. They're buying government protection, more regulations that small business and entrepreneurs can't afford as barriers of entry and things like that, and regulations. So, if we really wanted to grow the economy, the policies that are happening now are pretty bad. What I think should happen, and I've read a lot of books and different opinions and stuff, is, we cut taxes for the middle, for pretty much everyone, but especially, the middle class, and on small businesses and things like that. And we cut government spending, and we say, if entrepreneurs and small businesses, if you're going to make investments back into the United States, you're going to either pay a very, very low tax, maybe a flat tax, or you're not going to pay any tax at all for a while. And you're going to make investments in our country and, maybe provide value. You're going to solve a problem in the market, and you're going to have a chance to grow and hire some employees and things like that. And that's not what's happening right now. We're in a stage where most people, most companies who are hiring, except maybe for some large corporations because they can afford, these increased regulations, they're hiring part-time though. Maybe Walmart is not hiring part-time, but some of these other larger corporations, they'll hire you full-time, but then they'll churn and burn you. So if you're like a consultant for Booz Allen Hamilton or Accenture or Deloitte here outside of Washington, D.C., you just got hired, you're all bushy-tailed and bright-eyed, but I have friends who have done this. Some of them work less hours, but most of those consulting jobs, you're working 70, 80-hour weeks like an investment banker. Some of the jobs, you're up at 3 or 4 a.m. on Skype to speak with, project managers in India and things like that almost every day. And then, you're traveling a couple weeks a month to, places that the upper management teams don't want to travel to. So there's a huge trade-off there. And we look at the jobs numbers now, Charles, and you mentioned this earlier in the interview. The jobs numbers are bogus. I mean, they're counting, they're saying, oh, look at all these jobs created. These are part-time jobs. And for people, I think it's a good point that people, 26 or 25 to 54, which is, the prime working age for adult males, those people have been losing jobs. The jobs gains have not been in that range. So there's a lot of males who either just graduated college or have been out of college for a little while, and they're looking for more work, and they're not finding that chance to, find a full-time job, start a family, build savings and things like that. All these things are either being pushed back or eliminated.
Right, Jason. And I think you're so right about the extreme pressures put on the top 5 or 10% of the labor force that's working for the corporatocracy on a global scale. And so people, they really are burning out. In other words, it's not like a fun way to live. And so, yeah, you're making $200,000 or whatever, but you're destroying
your
life.
Body can't handle it.
Yeah.
You're not just not fun. I mean, unless you're eating very healthy and working out all the time, and even then your body could still break down. I've gotten sick and burnout and stuff like that from working that many hours in the past at different jobs and startup. Although I didn't work for a large corporation.
So I want to talk a little bit about to extend your thoughts on what policies and things we could do that would be different, that would be more effective than what we've got right now. And I want to talk about the community economy, which is, to me, the forgotten third part of the economy. When we read the conventional, financial media, it's like the government or the corporate America. And the community economy is sort of just left unnoticed. And yet this is where the small business that you describe as creating the jobs, this is where a small business should be thriving. And when you mention the decline in male employment, I tie this directly to the difficulty of starting your own job. And that when we think back like 25, 30 years, a lot of males were self-employed. In other words, they were auto mechanics, or they were carpenters that were independent, or small contractors. There were a lot of male-centric, if you will, kinds of businesses that were solo proprietors, or they had one or two workers. And so the government regulatory structure has made it more and more difficult to have a legitimate business. So a lot of these guys have been pushed into the black market. In other words, they're still doing mechanics and construction, but they're doing it in the cash economy because they simply can't deal with the regulatory burdens. And it's not just the fees. It's like dealing with all the liability. And, did you tell your workers that they are, allowed a 15-minute break, and if you do that, then, you're in violation of some law and they can sue you. And I know people who've gone through this, that there's so much red tape now. If you try to be legitimate, it'll break you. And so we have to make it easier to start a business. And there's so much that local government could do. And here's sort of my way of summarizing it is, if some global corporation announces that it's going to bring, 500 people call center into the community, the newspapers are raving, yay, look at this, 500 jobs, corporate, some giant corporation from somewhere else is going to hire 500 people. Meanwhile, what did they do for small business? Nobody's looking at if they allowed 250 small businesses to emerge with very little red tape and very low cost, and each of those people hired one person. They'd have the same 500 jobs and a much more vibrant local economy.
Well, Charles, here's the thing about those corporations. When they build these new factories and things like that, their share price actually doesn't normally go up. So when they make these investments, the shareholders think, that's risky. When they fire employees, when they become more efficient, right, their share prices actually go up. So the people are like, they're becoming more efficient, they're cutting costs, right? They've fired these employees. So that's kind of the view, and that's why, a lot of these large corporations, they're not making investments into a lot of people, especially in the United States nowadays. And the other thing we talked about is how cheap capital is. When capital is this cheap, when the Keynesians, the central planners, Wall Street, when they've made capital this cheap now, it's really easy to go invest in all the new technologies. And you brought up early, before we started recording, you brought up how, that's not creating value added for the economy, investing in robotics and things like that, because, robotics can be commoditized. So unless the company is creating its own intellectual property and patents and things like that and making its own robots, it doesn't have anything that differentiates itself, because robots are going to become commoditized at some point too, although, we're going through a major innovation stage right now. So there's investments, obviously, with this cheap capital being made into additional automation of robots, especially when workers, in restaurants start demanding higher and higher wages. They think, I deserve a living wage for this and that. But, with these beginning entry-level jobs, they're not meant to have a career at normally. They're meant to, add some skills or prove that that you can hold down a job for a couple of years and then go find a better job. But because the jobs market has gone so bad, these employees, either they spent the money or they start a family, they don't want to leave these jobs because they can't find a better alternative. So, now we have these workers in these restaurants and things, demanding a higher wage, But with the cheap capital, you're seeing, Red Robin, Chili's, so many of these, even McDonald's, they're just replacing workers left and right with touch screens where the customer can basically walk up, on the touch screen, order what they want, swipe a credit card, maybe someone brings them the food, and that's about it.
Right, Jason. And so, and we've seen this trend. I mean, back in the 70s, and I'm old enough to remember, but, there was always a pump jockey or a person who would pump your gas, right? The gas station, of which there were many more at that time, paid somebody to do these things. And, of course, that all went away because that labor was just too expensive, and it was not, it wasn't leveraging, value, if you will, right? And so now everybody pumps their own gas, except in places like Oregon, which has a law that says a human being has to pump the gas. And so you can create low-level work by fiat, if you will, like that. But if we go back to our discussion of Michael Spence and Wallerstein, you're not really creating value that way. You are creating employment, sort of make work. But I think make work has the same problem as guaranteed income for everybody, is that number one, it's extremely expensive. You're basically subsidizing, make work or guaranteed income for everyone by taxing the most productive or the remaining productive people in the economy. And people don't think this through, that you're basically taking money away from potentially productive investments in order to fund like make work that isn't really that great, or just paying people to sit home and watch TV. And so, in a big picture, it's really a waste of potentially productive people to just like make everybody like a sort of serf, if you will. I think that guaranteed income is just an institutionalized form of serfdom, because you're basically writing off all these people and saying you guys are worthless, and you can just stay home and do nothing. And obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in the world. And so, my view is we need to create and productive, work. That's what should be guaranteed, and not by taxing somebody else, because you're taking away capital that could be going somewhere else. And so, I think we need a new sort of system, if you will, a new way of looking at how to approach the decline of labor. And I look around and I see so many opportunities, and we have to make it easier to take those opportunities. And I personally think that guaranteed income is serfdom too, because people want to contribute. It's in our human nature that we want to be productive. We want to be valued for being part of something bigger than ourselves. And so by saying, we're just going to pay everybody to stay at home, we're depriving them of the core elements of a good human life. And if you see people that get some kind of minimal income and they're not valued, they have no productive work, they're often depressed, they're on drugs, they're going downhill, or they're simply dying. And so to say that that's a solution is, to me, literally insane. We can do better.
Yeah, I agree. It's serfdom. We were discussing this book before we started recording. I don't know if you've read it, but I've recommended it to our listeners in the past. I'll actually mention it again. It's called Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford. And, he talks about the different estimations for how many jobs will be lost due to robots and automation. He says over 50%, including, high-end jobs, and also, middle-class jobs and lower-end jobs and things like that. He's like, basically, robots and automation are gonna cut into a lot of people's different jobs, whether it's doctors, things like that. Software programs can do research, legal research work and things like that. Or, legal research has been outsourced to India and Philippines and many other countries. So but his solution, though, Charles, is basically like, you know what? He basically says, and I guess he's this rich technology guy who is, a limousine liberal or a rich Democrat. He probably goes to Davos and hangs out with the technocrats and things like that. But his solution is, you know what? Let's just give everyone $50,000. you don't need to work. He doesn't like capitalism. He doesn't like Austrian school economics. He doesn't like libertarians. He doesn't like Friedrich Hayek. He spent a lot of the book bashing capitalism, and yet, he's rich. He got rich off of it. I'm sure he's investing in robotics to make money off of it, but he's saying, other people don't need to do this. So it's just kind of hypocritical, but it's from the normal crowd. And I agree with you 100% on meaningful work. People there. I know a lot of people here in the Washington, D.C. area. People are very book smart. Some of them have 2 or 3 degrees. There's a lot of people here with masters and PhDs. But I know so many people who rationalize, jobs they hate. They stay at it, for whatever reason. Either they have a family or they like their lifestyle. They don't want to take a risk and find something they find meaningful. But, if you're working a bad job for a very, very long time, you're going to end up probably regretting it for most of your life. Yes, it's a paycheck. Maybe you have a little savings, although now that's tough. But if you do meaningful work for most of your life, you're going to end up a lot happier, I would say. Obviously the guys like Peter Drucker, they can't fully quantify that, maybe the happiness factor or things like that, but, you won't get sick as much and things like that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Jason, because and that's why I included the term, meaningful work in the title of my book, is that we have sort of depreciated work down to it's all about minimum wage or whether you're making the big bucks. And actually what we should be focusing on is let's create meaningful work. And meaningful work, it doesn't mean that it's easy work. I mean, digging a ditch can be meaningful work if you feel like you're serving your community, if you're having fun with your friends. I mean, I've done a lot of hard physical labor, and it's the kind of work that people go, oh, that would be horrible. That's what we should have machines to do. But the point is that meaning comes from being productive in a community or in a group, and that's what people savor. That's what's scarce in our world. And so let's look for opportunities to do more of that instead of paying people to do nothing. That's not a solution. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the emerging economy. And what we need to look at is how can we get the skill set and the mindset and share those elements that enable people to function at a high level in the emerging economy. And it means having multiple skills, having good social skills, soft skills, and having an entrepreneurial mindset where you're looking at what's scarce and how you can fulfill it, or how you can create value, how you can bring people together to create meaningful work.
Yeah, I think meaningful, Charles, to me at least, it's a subjective term. So what's meaningful to one person is not meaningful to another. Humans tend to, unfortunately, we look at things in extremes. So when you're talking about sports or things you're passionate about, you'll label either love or hate or things like that. But the world's not black and white. The world's gray. So things tend to be more subjective when a lot of people think things are objective. And I think that's the case with meaningful work there. So what's meaningful to you may not be meaningful to me, and what's meaningful to me may not be meaningful to you or a lot of other people. So I think we have to respect each other's differences, and I think that's gotten lost in this, unfortunately, this politically correct, stupid society we have now, where people can't really speak their minds anymore. They have to be scared of, being called out for things. And the whole society in the United States, Charles, has just gotten so politically correct. You can't even really have an honest conversation with people and debate facts or anything like that, like you and I are having. If we had this conversation on a mainstream TV network, any of the things we said would be questioned. You're white privilege or things like that.
You're right. Yeah, I know it, and it's eroding the quality of the conversations we need to have about the labor market, about capital, about commoditization, all these big topics that are really driving the reality of the qualitative changes in the economy. So and I guess I want to kind of end at least bring up a positive point. I look at where things are working well in the United States, and they tend to be in the community level. In other words, when communities depend on the federal government for subsidies or programs, they're almost always ghettos. And if they depend on corporate America to bring in some big factory or something, corporate America is more likely to be closing the factory, right, for the reasons that we discussed. And so, but if they look to their own community and start building like social capital and resources, those are the places that are thriving. And I like beer and I like wine, and so I've visited a lot of brew pubs in places that are like brew pub, meccas like Oregon, and the economies are doing really well, and it's because people are finding that it's fun to work at these places. And as you say, maybe other people would say, "Oh, that's not meaningful to me," but the whole idea is let's create a wide spectrum of work, because then it's much more likely that we'll all find a place in a wide spectrum. And so that's where I go back to the community economy, is where you create the big spectrum. If you're just relying on the central state and large multinational corporations, you're going to get a very narrow spectrum of jobs. And where if you're starting to encourage people to start their own jobs or be sole proprietors, you get a huge spectrum of value creation and work. So that's where I think the key is. That's the future.
Yeah, I think people, when they graduate college, they've read so many textbooks. Maybe they've gotten A's and B's. They graduated with good grades and things like that. They're very tired of learning. But what they don't understand, and they'll learn this later in life if they haven't already learned it yet, from working in the real world and dealing with older, more experienced professional people, the world's changing so rapidly. We have outsourcing, we have the global economy, there's global competition. You can cooperate with people in different countries online through Skype or these other websites I mentioned earlier in the interview. You have technology changing so rapidly, you basically cannot stop learning now. If you're stubborn, if you're not willing to adapt, you may struggle. Even if you're the best in your industry at something, even then, technology or someone else, they could say, well, this cheaper worker, you are better than him, but you're not worth paying, 5 or 10 times the salary to this younger worker who's maybe only a little bit worse than you. So I think our listeners out there, they just need to commit their life to learning and adding skills and things like that. So if you speak, if you're good with people, the funny thing, Charles, is a lot of people think when they listen to my podcast, they think I'm extroverted, and I'm actually not. I'm passionate about certain subjects like discussing, the economy and investing and things like that in finance and learning about different things. And I'm passionate about sports and different things like that. But I'm not passionate about a lot of other stuff. I'm actually fairly shy and reserved, and I like to listen most of the time. But if and my public speaking also, it's gotten, since I first started, if you go back and listen to some of the original podcasts from 4 or 5 years ago that I did, I've improved leaps and bounds. But, if you keep adding skills and keep learning new things and keep pushing your boundaries and getting out of your comfort zone, there's going to be something there for you. So maybe, if you have free time, maybe you should learn Spanish. Maybe you should learn some Mandarin Chinese or something. And maybe you should go to codeacademy.com online and learn some computer programming. All these skills in unison with your other skills, they may give you some ideas to start a business. They may get you some consulting work or maybe even a full-time job or something like that online. You can work from home online or something.
Right, Jason. I think you've made an excellent summary there of what the solution is that we're talking about. And you might meet somebody who you could start a business with or collaborate with. And when we talk about the freelance economy or the shared economy, what we're really talking about is developing collaborative skills. That we're also used to living in hierarchies where you've got a boss and you deal with the boss's boss, and there's a meeting of the bosses, and it's like the shared economy and the emerging economy is based on collaboration of peers, and that's why we call it the peer-to-peer economy as well. And so it's really a much more efficient and vibrant model for creating value and creating ownership of assets. And assets are not just factories. Assets are skills and your connections, your social capital. So that's what we're talking about as being worth developing. And I applaud everything you said. It's totally right on, and it's what you've used to make Wall Street for Main Street a success in terms of rising readership and your YouTube channel. And I think you're living what we're talking about.
Exactly, and I actually have larger goals. I want to create a revolutionary educational technology company where people, if they want to learn business, investing skills, Austrian school economics, entrepreneurship, all these different skills that people need to be a successful business person or investor in different asset classes, they can go to one website, they can learn it from successful people with virtual classrooms and live chat at an affordable price. I haven't found the investor yet, but hopefully someone will listen to this podcast or give me a referral or something like that, and we'll get, because, educational technology, this is the way things are going, where textbooks and professors, these things are so expensive now, you're not getting good value for your money. But in terms of, the old economy, like you said, I mean, my parents, like, it used to be, I guess it was this way with my grandparents and my parents, it was a stigma if you got fired, right? You were like, oh, the old mindset was that you could work 20, 30 years or more, right, at this job. You were guaranteed stock options, pension, all these different things, right? Those days are completely gone, basically. And you're going to need to provide value and keep adding skills due to competition. And I think the new studies, Charles, are saying that, like, millennials and Generation Xers, they can expect to have at least 10 jobs, I think, in their adult lifetime.
Right, and what that does is it incentivizes us to create multiple income streams and sort of a multi-layered way of making a living, if you will, instead of just, as you say, the old model of you work for one outfit or one agency and get your gold watch at 30 years. Not only is that not as satisfying as you might imagine, it's also just becoming a rare thing for all the reasons we've described. And I also want to say that you're totally I love your view of the way education for real life employment, and that's partly why I wrote my book, The Nearly Free University, is that I was trying to lay out a blueprint for precisely the system that you described, where experts and in the working experts, not academic experts necessarily, but working experts in fields would extend and their expertise so that anybody could access it for a low fee and leverage leverage what's available digitally that's not available in the real world.
Yeah, I think that's definitely coming. We're starting to see that with, like, MIT posting their lectures, and you could learn computer science for free on Google. Google has free programs, so there's a lot of places where you can learn how to do computer programming for free online, like Code Academy and others. I think Wharton School of Business even posted, either on Coursera or another website, they posted, their first full year of MBA courses. All the lectures are on videotape for free online. So those are, a taste of things to come. But we're going to see, obviously, the Ivy Leagues are still going to maintain value. Just because your connections and the diploma has the name on it, the brand. But, some of these other schools where people are paying $40,000, $50,000 a year and they're not getting any value from it, these things are going to be disrupted. Very, very, it's not going to happen maybe right away, but over the next decade or two, with the investments that are going into educational technology with virtual classrooms and things like that, these universities that are charging that kind of price, their prices are going to have to come down, or they're going to lose a lot of students.
Right, and just to tie this back in to one of our previous points about what was tradable labor, which is basically labor that can be commoditized, it can be done anywhere in the world, and the untradeable or labor that's very difficult to commoditize. And there's a huge educational opportunity in this kind of work. For instance, permaculture. A lot of people are interested in that, and you can basically learn a huge amount on what I call YouTube University, right? I mean, you can just go to YouTube and you can learn an amazing amount of skills and knowledge about practical stuff that is not that can't be traded, and permaculture, appliance repair, bike repair. There's thousands of opportunities for learning skills that can't be done elsewhere in the world. They need to be done in the local community.
Exactly. I think, also with these local communities, you get to meet people face to face, so people have to learn communication skills. Part of, the technology with social media is, I get to reach out to people like you, I get to meet them, but I also don't get to speak as much to people face to face. Now, obviously, I live right outside of Washington, D.C., and there's not many people who agree with anything I say, but, people are losing, these valuable communication skills that in the past were staple. So my generation, which is Generation X and the millennials, these guys are not as good with, personal skills and talking face to face. Even in the room next, I've heard of stories with siblings, kids, younger kids, they don't even go, they live in the same house next door in the rooms, and they don't even talk to each other. They speak to each other on Google Chat. So
that
okay, well,
what, Charles? I said that is an extreme.
Well, I think it's more, I heard that story a while ago on a podcast. I forget where, but I think it's more common than people realize. So as humans, we're losing those connections. I mean, even with dating and stuff like that, so many text messages. I mean, I see so many pretty girls at the gym now, and you can't even talk to them because they're already texting 20 different guys they're not even working out. They're on the lowest speed on the treadmill, texting 20 people. But anyways, though, I'll try not to talk about my dating life or lack thereof anymore. I just want to thank you again for your time, Charles. Please tell our listeners where they can find your book.
Please visit me at of2minds.com, and you can read the sample chapter and find out more, or find the book on Amazon.
And to promote your book a little bit more, your book has almost full 5-star reviews on Amazon already. So listeners should think about checking it out. If maybe you're a parent and your kids graduating college soon, and you want to educate them more about jobs, that the old paradigm is dead. Because unfortunately, Charles, I think whether it's my parents or others, dealing with my other siblings and things, there's a lot of parents out there who have millennials or Generation Xers, and they believe in this old paradigm of jobs, and they don't fully understand how radically things have already changed and are in the process of changing in the jobs market. It's just so much different than things were even a decade or two ago, that a lot of the baby boomer generation, they're not fully understanding all the things going on right now.
Absolutely. And so, my book, Get a Job, is about the emerging economy, and A Radically Beneficial World is about automation and dealing with that in a positive fashion.
Yep. So baby boomers out there who are parents, maybe you should think about buying your millennial or Generation X or kid this book for Christmas.
Thank you very much, Jason. Appreciate the pitch.